Think about the last time you were genuinely afraid of the dark. Not the mild annoyance of fumbling for a light switch, not the vague unease of a power cut, but actual bone-deep terror. The kind where your body decides before your brain does that something out there wants to kill you. You probably can't remember a time like that. Your ancestors couldn't forget it. For 300,000 years, every human being who ever lived had to survive the night. You could not. And yet here you are, which means they figured something out. Several things, actually, and the answers reveal something strange and uncomfortable about the species we used to be, and the one we've become. Let's start with the most basic question. What was the night actually like? You see, on a moonless evening, away from any fire, the darkness was total, complete. You could hold your hand 6 inches from your face and see nothing. Not a shape, not a shadow, just black. Modern humans almost never experience this. There are researchers who study darkness, actual darkness, and they report that after just a few minutes without any artificial light source, the human brain starts to generate its own. You begin to see patterns that aren't there. Your eyes, desperate for input, start hallucinating faint movement at the edges of your vision. Your ancestors lived in that darkness every night, and the things sharing it with them had eyes built for exactly this. A leopard's pupils can dilate 7 times wider than a human's. A hyena's night vision is sharp enough to spot movement at 200 meters in near total darkness. Lions are crepuscular hunters, most active at dusk and dawn, when your visibility is at its worst, and theirs is near perfect. The night was not neutral territory, it belonged to them. But before the fire came the location, because fire could only protect you if you were still alive when you lit it. The choice of where to sleep, made every single evening before the light failed, was its own survival skill. Get it wrong once, and there was no second attempt. Elevated ground was the first principle. A hillside, a rock shelf, a ridge with a clear view of the approach below. Height gave you time. A predator climbing toward you made noise. It disturbed loose rock. It announced itself in a way that a predator crossing flat ground in the dark simply didn't. A few extra seconds of warning was the difference between reacting and not reacting at all. Caves were the most coveted shelter available, and also the most contested. Paleontologists excavating sites like Pinnacle Point in South Africa and Kibera Cave in Israel have found layers of occupation spanning tens of thousands of years. The same sites, used by generation after generation, because good shelter was genuinely scarce and worth fighting for. A cave with a single narrow entrance meant only one direction to defend. But caves were not always available. For most of human prehistory, most people were moving, following game, following water, following the season. A fixed cave was a luxury. What you had instead was judgment. Dense brush on 2 or 3 sides, a natural hollow that reduced your exposure, a fallen tree that broke your outline against the open ground. Anything that forced an approaching predator to slow down, to change direction, to make noise before it reached you. Ancient humans read landscapes the way we read maps. Every new campsite was a security assessment. Where does the wind come from? Where does the ground flatten out and give something a silent approach? Where is the water? And what else comes to water after dark? The site was chosen before sunset, never after, because by the time the darkness was complete, it was too late to be looking. But if they couldn't find caves, there was another option to make the night smaller. Campfires. It doesn't just produce light, it produces a perimeter, a circle of safety roughly 10 meters in diameter, inside which predators will not enter. The heat, the smoke, the noise, the unpredictable flickering, all of it registers in the predator's brain as danger, not worth it. Move on. Outside that circle, you die. Inside it, you live. The earliest confirmed evidence of humans controlling fire dates to roughly 1 million years ago at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. But the relationship between fire and survival almost certainly goes back further. Anthropologists believe that fire didn't just protect early humans. It fundamentally rewired how they organized their days and nights. Before fire, when the sun set, activity stopped. You found the highest, most defensible spot you could reach. You stayed still, and you waited for morning. Movement at night was a death sentence. Fire changed that. Suddenly there were hours, real, usable, social hours on the other side of sunset. Hours when you could eat, talk, repair tools, tend to the sick, plan tomorrow's hunt. Hours that other species didn't have. But fire only solves part of the problem because fire requires fuel, and fuel runs out. In the depths of winter, in the wet season, in a landscape stripped bare by drought, keeping a fire alive through an entire night was not guaranteed. Wood had to be gathered before dark. Embers had to be nursed. Someone had to stay awake. This is where the second survival mechanism comes in. Humans didn't sleep through the night. They couldn't afford to. Research into modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups whose lifestyles most closely resemble those of pre-agricultural humans, shows that nighttime sleep was almost never a single unbroken block. The Hadza of Tanzania, the San Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Tsimane of Bolivia. In all of these groups, sleep is fragmented. People wake. They tend the fire, they listen, they sleep again. In 2015, A study published in Current Biology tracked the sleep patterns of 3 hunter-gatherer groups across different continents. The researchers found that in none of them did the entire group sleep simultaneously. There was always someone awake, not by design, not by assigned watch schedules, just by the natural variation in sleep patterns across a group of people with different ages, different physical states, different anxieties. The group's survival was built into its biology. A camp where everyone sleeps at the same time is a camp that gets eaten. Human sleep evolved to prevent that. There is something else the night required that we almost never talk about: noise discipline. A sleeping camp is a vulnerable camp. A noisy sleeping camp is a dead one. Hunter-gatherer groups who have been studied report an acute, almost involuntary sensitivity to sound at night that most modern humans have entirely lost. The crack of a branch in the wrong direction, the sudden silence of insects, a change in wind that carries the wrong smell. These were not learned behaviors, they were biological ones. The human stress hormone cortisol follows a precise nightly curve, lowest in the first hours of sleep, then rising slowly toward dawn. This rise is not accidental. It is an ancient alarm system, engineered by millions of years of selection pressure, designed to bring you toward wakefulness as the darkness deepens toward the hours when predators are most active. The reason so many people today wake between 3 and 5 in the morning with a vague, sourceless anxiety they can't explain, that's the old system still running, waiting for the leopard that isn't coming. But survival wasn't purely defensive. The night was also where ancient humans built something that no other species on Earth had ever built before. Not shelter, not tools, not fire, culture. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime and nighttime conversations among the Jew/Hwansi Bushmen of the Kalahari. During the day, she found that roughly 80% of conversations were practical. Who hunts where? What's ready to harvest? Disputes to resolve? Problems to fix? Survival talk. But at night around the fire, the entire register shifted. 80% of nighttime conversation was stories, tales of ancestors, accounts of distant places none of the listeners had ever seen, jokes that moved through the camp like fire through dry grass, songs that locked information into memory, which plants healed, which were poison, which stars marked which season. The campfire was a technology as much as flint or bone. It was the first classroom, the first archive, the first place where a human being could look at someone who would die before they did and say, "Here is what you need to know." The night didn't just test whether you could survive. It decided whether anything you knew would outlast you. And then there is the last thing, the strangest one. The thing scientists only began to understand in the 1990s. Ancient humans didn't just survive the night differently than we do, they experienced it differently. In 1992, psychiatrist Thomas Vare at the National Institute of Mental Health ran an experiment. He removed artificial light entirely from a group of participants. 14 hours of darkness a night for a month, simulating pre-industrial conditions. Within weeks, every single participant shifted into the same sleep pattern. 4 hours of sleep, 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness, then 4 more hours of sleep. Nobody told them to do this. No instructions were given. Their bodies simply returned to something older. Vare measured their hormone levels during that middle waking window. What he found was not what he expected. Prolactin, a hormone associated with deep calm, meditation, and dreamlike states, was elevated far beyond normal waking levels. Participants described the experience not as insomnia, but as a kind of stillness, a soft, floating awareness between sleep states that felt unlike anything in their normal lives. One participant called it the quietest my mind has ever been. This wasn't a gap in sleep. It was its own state of consciousness, one that hundreds of thousands of years of human beings moved through every night, lying awake in the dark between first and second sleep, thinking about their lives in a way that is almost impossible to access in the modern world. Historian Roger E. Kirch spent 16 years combing through pre-industrial records and found over 500 references to this practice. In prayer books, court documents, medical texts, personal letters. First sleep and second sleep were simply the normal words for how nights worked. The middle waking hours were considered the best time to pray, to reflect, to conceive children, to make decisions. The night gave people something the day couldn't, quiet that was deep enough to hear themselves think. But we took all of that away. Paris installed street lamps in the 1660s. London followed. Cheaper candles came. Then gas lamps. Then in 1879, Edison's bulb. And within a single generation, a blink against the 300,000 years that came before, the ancient night was gone. The predators retreated. The fire became optional. The fragmented sleep smoothed into a single block. The middle waking hours vanished, and the people who still experienced them were told they had a disorder. We called the whole thing progress, and most of it was. But here's what didn't make it through. That still, prolactin-soaked window in the middle of the night, the one where your ancestors lay in the dark between first and second sleep and sorted through their lives in silence. The biological need for it didn't disappear when the lights came on. It just stopped being met. Modern sleep researchers believe this unmet need may be connected to the epidemic dynamic of anxiety, rumination, and what we loosely call racing thoughts at night that defines so much of contemporary mental life. The mind still wants that window. It still searches for the quiet. It just can't find it anymore.